Hey everybody, this is Agent Ray Chaluba, or as a lot of you know me as, Agent Ray Chaluba. If you are here watching this video, it is probably because you are curious about salary arbitration. It's my favorite part of the off season. I don't have a player going through salary arbitration this year. Sadly, I know, free agency instead. But I wanted to make up a hypothetical player for you guys and act as though this was a client of mine and show you kind of the process of what an off-season actually looks like, representing a salary arb player, and the timeline of kind of how you go about things, how you analyze things, what an agent would be doing for a player, and how an agent would be analyzing a specific player throughout the off season. Make sure to like this video and subscribe, and we will walk through the entire arbitration season for 2020-2021. It's gonna be wild. First of all, if you haven't watched the MLB arbitration, salary arbitration for dummies that I have on my YouTube, go watch it first. It gives you the overarching view of being an arb player, how you qualify for arbitration. I mean, just to kind of recap it really quickly, you need, unless you're a Super 2, which I have a video on that as well, but you need more than 3 years of service and less than 6, right? Because once you get 6, now you're a free agent. When you go through salary arbitration, when you have that amount of service, the team controls you for 6 years, right? But the first 3, they get to unilaterally decide what to pay you. Most times they end up paying you the league minimum. So that's up through 3 years. Then once you hit arbitration, once you've earned 3 years or you're a Super 2, the team still controls you for 3 more, but you get to now negotiate a salary. There's a structure that you have to fit in, which is the arbitration system, but you get somewhat of a say. You get to negotiate. So basically, the team doesn't unilaterally get to decide what to pay you. So now if you don't come to an agreement in this negotiation by the deadline, which is in January, then you end up in a hearing, and that's what the salary arbitration hearings are. It's a backward-looking process. Traditionally, when a team is going to sign a player and they're evaluating what this player's worth, what are they thinking of? What are they looking at? They're looking at, what is this player going to do for me in the future? That's not what salary arbitration is. You do not make your money based on what you might do. Nobody cares in salary arbitration. All that matters is, what have you done? What did you do this past year? And you get paid for that. So imagine going into work for a full year, then at the end of the year, they look at your work and everything you did this past year, and they take into consideration your whole tenure in the big leagues or in this job, right? They look at everything you've done. Maybe you've been at other companies in the past, but the most important is this past year. What did you do for this company? And then they basically will take that, they'll look at other similar people who've had similar amounts of time in that position like you had, and what did they do? How do you compare to them? And then what did they make? And then they fit you into the structure based on the past and based on your past of what you did, right? So you're getting paid for what you did this past year. What you're going to do does not matter. The only thing that would affect the future is going to be if you have the existence of a physical defect. And what that is really is, it means you have an injury. So if you're going to miss the next year or like several months to start the year because of Tommy John or any other injury, what have you, your salary will be slightly discounted because of it. So that goes against you. But that's the only forward-thinking part of arbitration. It has a compounding effect on what you make in the future. Whatever salary you had as a second-time player, that will determine where you go as a third time. Because somebody who is at, let's say, 5 million their second time through arbitration, and let's say they have the exact same season as somebody who was at, 2 million. The same exact season, but one's at 5, one's at 2, the way they move the next year, the guy who's at 5 is going to get a higher raise, even though we don't like the word raise in arbitration, but forget that for now. He's gonna get a bigger raise than the guy at 2 for the same season. The higher you are, the further you can go if you continue to have, success. But where you were in the past affects where you're going to go the next year and the next year throughout the arbitration process. And that's also because in arbitration, in the system, teams can only cut a salary of a player by a maximum of 20%. That means that whatever you had the year before, the worst case scenario, and this rarely happens. It happens occasionally. It's happened once or twice when there's been multiple years where the player does not play at all. And for whatever reason, he's kept on the team, and they will, the first year after not playing, they'll give him the same salary. And then maybe the second year, they'll cut it by 20%. So it's a very locked in system. It's hard to fall. You can't really fall down, but it's hard to move up it. That brings me to this season, which is a weird one. And it's a weird one because, again, it is about what they did this past season. Now, you still have MVP caliber players, you still have Cy Young caliber players. However, the work that they actually did was only for 60 games. And so the way the club will look at it is they'll say, look, you were great for us, but you were great for us for 60 games. We only got 60 games worth of value out of you. So when you have to compare players, when you have to compare this player to previous players, when you compare the MVP to last year's MVP, let's say, the team will say that it's not comparable because they gave the club 162 games worth of value. And you simply didn't. So you can't end up where he is. But I mean, the agent argument, and from the player side, is look, a full season is a full season, and you gave players these awards. You viewed this as this is a complete season, and they produced at this level for a complete season. It wasn't their fault that it wasn't 162 games. They weren't injured. They didn't get sent down. This is what they were given. They performed the full amount of it. And so they should move throughout the system in accordance with the guys in the past who performed similarly. And then if they're penalized for this next year because it wasn't a full season, then they're going to come off of a lower salary the following year to then have to argue from there. It's just like it's a compounding effect. The league wants to keep salaries down. They always do, as much as they can. And the players want to push salaries as much as they can. I think the players have a much more difficult job because, again, it's all a backwards looking process and it's stagnant. It doesn't move because the guys you compared to guys in the past, who compared to guys in the past. So it's really hard to move the market. The LRD is the labor relations department. Those are the lawyers over at the MLB commissioner's office who they basically oversee all the arbitration and they do all the hearings and all of that. So you have the LRD and you have the union. And they're going to try really hard to create these universes of the salary arbitration players this year and where they fit. And usually they're going to look very, very different. And this year, my guess is they're going to look just drastically different, almost all of the numbers. Because again, there's going to be a philosophical difference in how they're valuing this past season. The one thing that MLB did agree on was these players this year in this season, they won't be used in future years as comparable players, as players that in future years will look back and say, I looked like this guy, so I should be paid similarly, right? So all these guys are basically going to be irrelevant in what we call the grid or the market. That makes sense because hopefully we'll never have another 60-game season. And so even to compare a guy's, MVP performance in a 60-game season it just wouldn't even make sense for a guy in a 162-game season in the future. This year, they will offer and add nothing to the salary arbitration market because they're just going to be in like a league of their own. Players that go through salary arbitration, they are controlled by the team for 6 years. However, each year, when they hit arbitration, the teams have until the non-tender deadline, December 2nd, to decide whether they want to tender the player a contract or not. If they tender a contract, the player goes through the arbitration system and they are in system. A couple options for teams if they decide they don't want to tender a contract. And that is, one, they can do a pre-tender deal. What a pre-tender deal is it has to be done before 8 p.m. Eastern on December 2nd. If it is done, any deal that is done before 8 p.m. Eastern is a pre-tender deal. What does that mean? It means it is not in the arbitration system. If it's not in the system, you can't really use it. If you're taking a player in arbitration and you need to compare him to salaries in the past, you have to use in-system contracts. So you can't use extensions, really. Those don't work. People try every now and then, but you don't want to use extensions. You don't want to use multi-year deals. You don't want to use any out-of-system contracts because it's not in the arbitration system. So if it's a pre-tender deal, it's not going to be an in-system contract and it won't really affect the market. Why would you do a pre-tender deal? You would do a pre-tender deal if you were a player that thinks they're not going to get tendered a contract. And so what happens is usually if you take a pre-tender deal, you're taking it at a slight discount than what you would have gotten in arbitration. And that's for the security of the fact that you're going to have a contract, because you don't want to risk, you think there's a very likely chance that the team won't tender you a contract and you won't go through arbitration and you'll be a free agent. And so instead of doing that, you'll just take, you want to stay with that team and this seems like a good offer. You don't want to have to even deal with testing the market and what that's going to look like. So you take a slight discount usually and you do a pre-tender deal. Why would a team, decide to non-tender a player? They're going to decide to non-tender a player because they think that whatever they would get in the arbitration system, is more than their worth or that they need to pay, right? They might have a lot of depth, and why pay this player this amount when I already have a guy on the major league minimum who's only going to make, $560 and he's about just as good. There are, and there have been even more recently, some fairly good players. You've had Jonathan Scope, you had Kevin Pillar, fairly good players that are, pretty high up in the salary structure that will get non-tendered. And that's again because the team doesn't want to pay them what they would get in system. So they just non-tender them and they become free agents. And when they become free agents, a lot of people think, oh, wow, well, that should be so much better. Wouldn't you want to be a free agent? It's better to go on the open market. No, it's not. Not in this case, because when you get non-tendered, when you become a free agent, teams basically know that they don't have to pay you as much as you would get in system, because the only reason that usually they didn't pay you that in system is because they don't think you're actually worth that. That's kind of the decision that teams have to make as to whether do we tender the player a contract or do we non-tender him. So I told you they could either do a pre-tender deal, the team could trade the player, get something in return, they could release the player and they become a free agent, and then they have to go on the open market. They have until December 2nd at 8 p.m. Eastern to make that decision. After that moment, if they decide they're going to tender a contract to that player, now they are in system. Once they are in system, after December 2nd, guess what? Basically, nothing happens until after the first week in January. You don't talk to teams. There's no negotiating. It's a time where the union's trying to get a hold on where's every agent kind of viewing where the players are going to go. Are you working on possible hearing slides in case you do have to go to hearing? Are you, prepping all of these things? And the LRD, I'm guessing, is doing the same thing, but there's no communication really with the team talking about the players. It all happens right before the non-tender deadline, and then it kind of dies out. And then it picks up again about 72 hours before the filing deadline. It's on a Friday at 1 p.m. So we're going to go through the whole process of that. But right now what we have coming up is the non-tender deadline. So again, when I show you guys the hypothetical player, we're going to look at and decide, okay, this year, the reality is there's probably going to be a lot of non-tenders. Last year, I believe there were 40 non-tenders. This year, I'm guessing there are going to be a lot more. There also might be a lot more pre-tender deals that are done out of system. Given whatever the player's stats look like in a season, what's the best strategy? There's a good chance that a lot of agents right now are talking to their players encouraging them to consider pre-tender deals. It's going to be weird. A lot of things are going to happen. A lot of things that we don't normally see. Should you try to get a pre-tender deal? They might not even want to give you a pre-tender deal. Maybe just getting non-tendered and at that point and, you know, becoming a free agent. So again, it's going to be really interesting. I'm excited to take you guys through it, and you know, with a hypothetical player, I think I'm gonna pick a first-time player. This year I'll pick a starting pitcher. If this goes well, I'll do it again, you know, maybe next year, and I'll pick a reliever, because relievers are, you know, valued very differently. The way you look at the player and how you analyze where they should go and their performance is very different than a starting pitcher, obviously. And then another year I'll do a hitter or maybe a catcher. If you guys have any feedback or things you want to know more about, just let me know. But if you enjoy this process and you want to learn more about it, make sure to subscribe to my channel and follow along in this series, because I will take you guys step by step as an agent through the arbitration system and through this arbitration system this year, which is going to be wild. I'm excited for it because I don't even know what to expect. Nobody does.